What is up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health and social well-being. On screen right now, you guys are going to be seeing a training session from Wednesday. This was with my client Michael. It was our primary day as we were officially 14 weeks out from nationals. Michael's had squat and deadlift, and for me it was a full SBD day. And while this is playing, I just want to talk to you guys very briefly about something that I think is very important. That's understanding the difference between foundational cues and individual cues, and why it's important to understand this difference and how they kind of can be connected but are very distinct from each other as far as like when we use them and how we apply them. And when I say that they can be connected, it's in the sense of everybody has foundational cues, right? And our foundational cues, guys, just for clarification, are going to be those things that apply to pretty much everyone across the board. Things like wanting to keep your upper back tight on squats, want to make sure you're properly retracting depressed on the bench press, making sure that you're squeezing the bar as tightly as you can on all big three, make sure you're pulling the slack on the deadlifts. These foundational cues that we would try to teach to everybody. And these are things that are important for both lifters and especially coaches to understand, because they're what help us establish a nice base of technique for most lifters across the board. Now, individual cues are going to be those cues that pretty much go into two categories. They're either a cue that you find just works specifically with a client, so it can be even something that you're cueing a client to do that's more for like a foundational general cue, but you found an individual way of cueing it because it just clicks for them better than what maybe the general cue did. But more specifically, when I'm talking about individual cues, I'm talking about cues that only apply to individuals on the basis of maybe like how they're built or what they found works best for them. And it's very important to understand the difference between these two, because what I'm seeing a lot of and what tends to happen is you take people who understand the general foundational cues, right? And they'll take those cues and try to apply it to people who've been lifting for years, and maybe they're more advanced lifters, and try to be like, oh, this individual isn't doing this correctly because they're going against this general foundational cue that we know to work. Like, for example, on the deadlift, generally speaking, you usually want to have like, a tight upper back and not much lumbar flexion, but there are some advanced lifters who pull more rounded upper back and they find that works for them, and that's because that's just something they make cue for themselves individually. So trying to take that general cue of no, you want the type of upper back on the deadlift, and applying it to a lifter who's been lifting for years, who is more advanced and knows their body and has learned how to maximize their leverages, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And at the same time, take an individual cue for somebody and trying to apply it to everyone generally across the board doesn't work either. Like, how often do we see like just general people on Instagram, for example, right? They'll point out an example of, oh, you should lift this way because this high level lifter lifts this way. Well, that high level lifter, once again, has learned to maximize their leverages and has been lifting for years. They've learned their body. They learn what works really well for them. But that doesn't mean that's something that you take and apply to everyone across the board. It's no different than trying to tell people like, oh, you all should sit back really far on your deadlifts, because that's what like the best like high level deadlifters, they're sitting back really far, not understanding that the high level deadlifters are built to deadlift, so they're able to get into that nice upright seated back position. Whereas for everybody else, once you pull the slack out and you wedge your hips back, some of us may have our hips starting a lot higher than others simply due to how our hips insert, our back angles, everything like that. It all comes into play. And the reason this is something important to understand is because, using Michael, for example, Michael is easily my most advanced athlete. He's a world level lifter. He's the strongest dude who I'm currently working with right now. And a lot of what we've changed or fixed, quote unquote, with this performance technique has been very, very subtle changes. And a lot of it's just been reminding him of foundational cues, like making sure he's keeping his upper back tight on squats, making sure he's starting a little bit closer to the bar on a sumo deadlift so that he can wedge into the bar a lot easier. Very basic things like that. And the big changes we made with Michael have come more from things like his programming, as far as making sure that we're doing adequate volume and workload to provide a stimulus for him to grow and adapt to, but not so much to where he can't recover from. Making sure he's on top of things like his accessory work and variations of the big three that really help work on his weaknesses. Making sure he's on top of things like his movement prep and mobility work. And we're going to be going over a lot more things as far as like what we're doing with Michael and how we're going about things leading into the meet, because that's something that quite a few of you requested for us to do, just to sit down and kind of talk about it and talk about the transition, like kind of what we did going into Worlds and what we're now doing going to Nationals. And that's going to be for another video another time. But the point is, those are where the big changes are coming from. I'm not making a whole lot of just drastic changes with Michael's form and technique in the sense of, oh, well, this is how I teach other clients, or this is what generally works, I'm going to have you do this, when I can clearly see stuff that's already working for him. And he's gotten to this level for a reason. It's just important to understand that distinction. Certain things like how extended your lower back might be in the squat, how toes forward you are, how internally rotated you are versus externally rotated. These are things that you kind of have to learn on your own a little bit. It's okay to have a coach who's there to help guide you with it, but what that coach needs to be able to understand is that their job is to do just that, to guide you and help you find the positions that are going to be most comfortable and feasible for you. It's one thing if you're doing something that we just know, generally speaking, does not work well for people across the board. Like, I've yet to find anybody where I'm like, oh yeah, you can squat with, like, you know, a loose upper back, like without getting your upper back tight. And I highly doubt I'm ever going to find anybody like that. So it's one thing if somebody is squatting a certain way and their technique is poor and they're only squatting that way out of habit, not necessarily because it feels better, it's more efficient. That's something you want to work on and fix regardless of how strong they are, how long they've been lifting. But when it's something else that can go one way or the other, like I said, for example, being more internally rotated while you're squatting or more externally rotated, you have to really be able to let the athlete feel things out for themselves. Because a lot of coaches get tedious, they get too tedious. And when you get so tedious trying to change every little thing because you got to feel like you're constantly doing something, you're actually doing a disservice. And the reality is the longer a client is under you, or the longer that you're lifting in general, the better you should get at it. Like, you shouldn't like need constant frequent like technique fixes and updates like every single day. There shouldn't always be something to fix. Not to say that, once again, you're not there to be that second pair of eyes as a coach to help your clients, like, you know, do better, remind them of certain things, especially if something is off technique wise. But the longer they're lifting, the more advanced they get, the less of that should be happening. The more should be a matter of, like, you know, reminding them of certain things, making sure they're on top of their recovery, making sure they're on top of their movement prep, making sure you're giving them proper volume dosages with their programming. And I feel like a lot of coaches just get in this weird mindset where they feel like if they aren't doing as much to like help their clients with technique as what they were in the beginning, they'll feel like their clients aren't valuing them as much. But the reality is, when you start with a beginner, there's going to be a whole lot more work with that compared to when you're working with a more advanced athlete. So it's very important to understand the difference, both as a coach, but even as a lifter. It's important to understand what cues you're using that work for you as an individual versus those more foundational cues that you can, like, you know, tell yourself and your friends as well. You don't want to tell your friends or other lifters like, oh, well, I do this, when it's more of an individual cue, and give it to them, and then next thing you know, they're feeling really weird about it or don't know how to go about it. Or in general, don't use cues that you don't really understand. Like, just telling somebody, hey, get your hips closer to the bar on sumo, isn't very useful. Explain what you mean by that. Properly get the slack out. Make sure you're wedging hard. Make sure your starting foot position is correct. Make sure that you're pushing your knees out, keeping the hips open so the bar doesn't get away from you. Breaking it down more like that is going to be far more useful than just telling somebody, hey, get your hips close to the bar on sumo, because what does that even mean just in and of itself? You know what I mean? But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video, guys. Just wanted to go over that because it's something that I felt was important, something that was just on my mind, so I wanted to share with you all. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and comment down below, let me know what you did. If you're not, leave a comment down below, let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific, and I'll catch you guys later.